Thank you all for being here. Michael Gardner.
Wow, this is really great to look out and see all the, can you hear me, hear me now? No. How about now? Yeah. All right. Here you go, Wes. It's really great to look out and see all of you here. I'm Michael Gardner, and it's really my honor to be here and have you all here. I want to thank you for coming on such a beautiful evening, and most importantly, for what may be the most crucial playoff game of the Celtics for the year. You've nevertheless have shown up, so that shows great interest, so thank you so much. On behalf of Alyssa Fenster, my wife Diane, and on behalf of myself, and on behalf of J Street, I want to thank Rabbi Wes and Temple Emanuel, the Temple Emanuel community generally, for inviting J Street here and having this event. It's really a terrific thing, and we're very grateful for it. I don't think I'm really going out on a limb when I say that everyone here tonight loves our shul. I'm not going out on a limb by saying that, am I? I don't think so. That everybody here cares about our country. Everybody here has great affection for Israel. I also don't think it's very controversial to point out that our times are fraught. There's great division in our own nation. Israel is confronting many difficult choices. The Mideast presents both opportunity and crises galore, and the world is both unsettled and unpredictable. At this particular junction then, one of the most urgent questions we face is the subject of tonight's discussion. What does it mean to be pro-Israel in 2025? For almost 30 years, I have had the privilege and the honor to know Rabbi Wes, and he has been obviously, as many of you know, deeply committed to Israel, both personally and as a leader of our community. And we very much look forward to hearing his thoughts and his perspective this evening. J Street is committed to promoting U.S. policies that embody and advance a strong Israel, a secure Israel, as a Jewish state and as a democratic state that advances and protects the civil and human rights of its citizens, both Israelis and Palestinians, and of Palestinians people in the Mideast community. Adina Vogel Ayalon, who is here with us tonight, is both the Vice President and Chief of Staff, known as number 2, in the entire J Street organization. We're very lucky to have her here tonight. She made Aliyah to Israel, I won't say how long ago. She is an Israeli citizen who lived on a kibbutz. She found love in Israel, married, raised a family, and for a significant period of time was part of the Shimon Peres Center for Peace and Innovation in Israel prior to joining J Street about 10 years ago. And we are really looking forward, as I'm sure you all are, to hear her perspective and thoughts. A few logistical matters. Rabbi Wes and Adena will be in dialogue with you for about 40 minutes. After that, we will have some time for questions. You've been provided note cards. Please write your questions down and make them truly questions, if you don't mind, not comments disguised in sheep's clothing. I'm a lawyer. I know a leading question when I see one. A statement along the lines of, wouldn't you agree that the Boston Celtics are the best team in the NBA, is not really a question. It's more like a comment, and we hope that you will do that. It's also highly understandable that there are strongly held views about what we're going to be talking about, and I would suspect some divergent views among an audience of this great size, this admirable size. I'm certain that everyone here will be respectful of those differing views, and we do ask that you hold your applause until the very end. when we're done, just a word that J Street does a lot of political work, both in New England and in DC generally. And there will be a lot of people here from J Street who will be very happy to take your questions. And if you're interested in doing more with J Street, we'll be happy to answer all your questions. And if you want to get more involved, we'd love to have you. So with that, Wes and Dina, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. I just wanted to add to Michael's beautiful words a short kavanah about why we're doing this. So a synagogue is a place of Jewish values. And one of the most important Jewish values in the Talmud, it's on every page of the Talmud, it's on every page of the Talmud multiple times, is scarcely found in our world today, either in America or in Israel. And that is to be able to have a thoughtful agreement where you don't agree with the person you're talking to, where you agree to disagree respectfully, responsibly, with humility, and listening. And I just want to offer kind of two proof texts. First is that the very first line in the Talmud, page 2 of Brachot, Me matai korin et Shema ba'arvit, until when can we say the evening Shema? There's not one, there's not two, there's three different responses, and the Talmud never decides between or among them. Each one is sustainable, each one is plausible. And that sets the tone. On every page of the Talmud, there's a disagreement with multiple voices in respectful dialogue. Point 2, we're in the Rabbi Chill sanctuary. Rabbi Chill and Janet named their first son Hillel. Hillel was said that Hillel and Shammai disagreed all the time, and that both of their views were valid. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. They're both the words of the living God, but the law was going to follow Hillel, not Shammai. And the reason was not because Hillel was more correct, it was how Hillel conducted himself in the conversation with Shammai. Hillel genuinely listened, and listened with deep respect and with deep humility. So that is what we are going for, a Jewish values conversation. It's not about the merits, it is about how we have this conversation with humility and deep learning. And it's really hard, and therefore even the more important when it's about stuff that you really, really care about, and we all really, really care about Israel. So, Adina, first of all, welcome, and thank you.
Thank you.
We're so honored to have you. I have been so excited to have this conversation. It's long overdue, and it's just so important. So I want to start, Adina, if you could begin by kind of telling your personal story. Tell us your story about how it came to be that you are in this seat tonight, at this moment.
Well, first, I'm here because you graciously opened your synagogue doors to me, so thank you. And thank you to everyone for making the time to be here for this conversation. As Rabbi Wes said, I think it's a critical time to be having such conversations, and we need to be doing this very frequently in the American Jewish community, being able to engage in conversations that are tough conversations, and conversations in which we have an opportunity to share diverse perspectives about our love and care for the state of Israel, and also for our community and for our country. How did I end up in this chair? Okay, so I'll try to be brief so we have a lot of room to cover territory. So I actually went to Boston University, and I grew up in a traditional American Jewish household. My father is actually a chazan in the conservative movement. And I went through day school education and Israel advocacy education, got to Boston University, and was encouraged by an Israeli friend of mine to attend a meeting together with Palestinians. This was the first time that I had had the opportunity to have a meeting with Palestinians, and I was encouraged by my Israeli friend to do so. It was at Boston University that I had my first encounter with the Palestinian narrative and with an Arab narrative about the history in the Middle East, which was incredibly impactful. And I went to study in Israel. I studied at Hebrew University for a year. And during that year, I had the opportunity to take ulpan classes together with Palestinians from East Jerusalem, which was another further opportunity that I had to be sort of encounter another narrative, another perspective about this place that I cared so deeply about and really felt was my home. That year was so important to me that I decided to make Aliyah after I graduated from Boston University, came back, finished my degree, and I moved to Israel. And I moved to a kibbutz, and that is where I lived for 12 years. And when I was trying to figure out, as any college grad, what I wanted to do with myself after graduating, I thought back to the years at Boston University and the time that I spent in what was the Palestinian-Israeli Peace Alliance, and realized that I was most passionate about was the opportunity to bridge some of the gaps, to provide opportunities for encounters that are difficult encounters with one another's narrative, with peace building. So I went to do a master's in conflict resolution and mediation at Tel Aviv University, and found myself working for peace building organizations in Israel between Jews and Arabs, citizens of Israel, Palestinian citizens of Israel, and Jewish Israelis. And then working at the Paris Center for Peace, where I had the opportunity to further my education about the reality working in peace building with Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, which is very different. And while I was at the Paris Center, I realized during that time that there's a significant component that is impacting the reality on the ground in Israel, and that component is actually the root of where I came from, which is this American Jewish community and U.S. foreign policy. Now, that is not the only factor or the only variable that impacts how events develop or how the reality develops in the region, but it is a significant role. And politics in general plays a very, very strong role in how we will find ourselves moving towards a resolution that I came very much to believe in, which is the reality of the state of Israel, a state that I believe in so deeply, the homeland for the Jewish people, living alongside a state for Palestinians. I feel deeply and committed to Jewish self-determination, and I realized also through that commitment to Jewish self-determination, it could only be realized through essentially realizing also a commitment to Palestinian self-determination as well. And I found J Street, which did not exist when it was just starting right as I was graduating college. And I had the privilege of starting to work for J Street in Israel. And what I did in Israel, which is important to this conversation, is I had the opportunity to provide educational experiences for members of Congress and Jewish lay people in the region, to have the opportunity to have the experiential education, the learning that I was really privileged to have living in Israel as an Israeli citizen. And I find myself in this seat today because I had the opportunity for the role to become the chief of staff at J Street in 2021, and so I moved back here with my family, and it was a difficult decision to leave the country that I had made my home and the community, but that is I believe so deeply in the work that J Street is doing and the impact that it can have both on our community here and on the reality in the region that it was important enough for me to move my family back to the United States to continue to do this work here.
Well, Adina, thank you for that. I hear so many notes in your narrative that I'm so curious about. One of the notes I hear in your narrative is idealism and seeing the dignity of everyone in the region and hope to build a more peaceful world. And I'm so curious to know what impact October 7th's horrors had on your idealism, and how you begin to make sense of the fact that people who shared your idealism, many of them were brutally murdered in the Gaza envelope. We had, last year we had Professor Alon Troen, who's in Brandeis. His daughter, Deborah, believed in peace and married Shlomi, who believed in peace. They moved to the Gaza envelope to make peace, and they were both murdered in the presence of their 16-year-old son, Roi. And then, of course, more recently, Oded Lifshitz in Nir Oz. I was on a mission, and I actually went to his house, which was destroyed and decimated and burnt, and Israel has left it the way it was. And you can see his cactus garden, And the thing of it is, as you know, as we know, he was so idealistic. He would drive, he was a Saba in his mid-80s, he would drive Palestinians to their doctor's appointments because he believed in peace one person at a time. And of course, he was kidnapped. And his wife, who was still alive, said, "My husband believed in peace. He was so idealistic, and he paid with his life." And so I'm just so curious about what October 7th did to your idealism.
Thank you for the question. I don't actually consider myself to be an idealist, but I consider myself to, and I believe in aspiring to a world with ideals and to living out the Jewish values that I was raised upon, treating others with respect. Don't do unto others what you would not want done to yourself. Like you to accept the stranger, to remember the experience that we had in Egypt. All of those, values that I was raised on are values that I take with me very seriously every day. But I actually view my my activism or my perspective and work to be very pragmatic. When I woke up on October 7th and saw the text messages on my phone, the first person that I saw that was killed, that I knew, was the head of the Sha'ar HaNegev Regional Council. And the first thing that came to my mind is, along with the shock and fear, and my kibbutz is, there were terrorists that got all the way up to about 7 kilometers south from where my kibbutz was, all the way up to Gedera. It was a painful, painful, painful moment for me, and then continuing to discover days after, because, like you said, many of the people in those communities are peace activists, were many people that I knew, and that J Street knew, people that had hosted our delegations in their homes. And so, yes, I was devastated and horrified. And one of the things that I believe is pragmatic in my approach has always been not to ascribe to a philosophy of conflict management. And what I believe is that the reality that we found ourselves in on October 6th was that we were living in a reality in which Netanyahu, that government, and was pursuing a policy of conflict management. We can manage the conflict, and we can continue to pursue our agenda of not moving forward towards a reality of conflict resolution, and that is what will keep us safe. I will make sure that there is money going and flowing to Hamas, right, from Qatar, and that is what will keep us safe. But actually, I do see the root causes of terrorism feeding on despair. Now, there is no justification for what happened on October 7th. What I know is that the reality of those individuals who were making their lives in Israel on the border were abandoned by their government. They were abandoned by their government on October 7th, my government also as an Israeli American, and they were abandoned prior to October 7th, because the policy of conflict management will create a reality in which we find ourselves in cycle after cycle of October 7th. And for me, my activism and the work that I do in J Street is to create a reality in which we don't dismiss the security threats. We address them head on, and then we address those security threats by understanding that the only way to address the true need for security for the Israeli people is by moving forward towards a resolution to the conflict, a resolution to the conflict that creates a reality in which there can be security for Israelis, and that also means that there is security for Palestinians. We need to understand that our realities are intertwined, and until we can understand that reality, we will find ourselves in a cycle of violence through and through. And to me, that isn't actually idealism. It's both a policy, a pragmatic policy of understanding the interests of my own people while realizing that the interests of another people and my interests are actually heavily interconnected in an interconnected region.
Adina, thank you for that corrective. I definitely accept that. What you're talking about is driven by pragmatism, to use your word. So let's go there for a second. What I think I hear you say, what I believe to be J Street's position, correct me if I misspeak, is you're an advocate of a two-state solution, of a state of Israel and a state of Palestine living side by side with one another. Is that still something you believe in?
So what J Street believes in is actually what we have coined the 23-state solution. Because when we look at the Middle East, we understand that Israel and the Palestinians are not the only people in the region, and that the true path towards security and peace involves a comprehensive regional agreement, which involves the other Arab states in the region. And we see that there have been normalization agreements that have taken place between Israel and other neighbors in the region, and those are very welcome agreements. But the true aspiration is to be able to be in a reality in which Israel has peace agreements with all of its Arab neighbors. And the only way for that reality to become a reality is for there to be a state of Palestine living alongside that state of Israel, and there you have a 23-state solution. It's about looking at Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the context of the variety of actors that have an influence on what's happening on the ground, and understanding that we have to look at it comprehensively in order to reach a reality that is actually secure and stable, not only for Israelis and Palestinians, but also more broadly in the region.
So, Adina, help me out here, because who could argue with a 23-state solution that was a solution and where parties made peace agreements and they were kept? Thinking about Israel and Egypt, for example, who wouldn't love that, more of that? Who wouldn't love that if we could have that? But I guess my question is, as you know well, Israel withdrew from Gaza, and it did not strike a peace agreement, that's for sure, but it withdrew from Gaza, and what it got was so many wars and so many Qassam missiles, too many to count, culminating in October 7th. So could you speak to why would any Israeli who has suffered and died, why would any Israeli who had loved ones who were raped, burnt, massacred, and murdered, why would any Israeli whose loved ones fell in battle ever have confidence to make a peace agreement with the people that did that to us?
Rabin said, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And I think that's an important thing to remember. There is no illusion that we we live in a region in which there are those that are not seeking in Israel's best interest, and there are those that are seeking to destroy the state of Israel. That is very, very true. Of course, within that region, you also have people that are unfortunately also victims of their own government, and I look very much at also the Palestinian people, and I hope people have seen the types of demonstrations that have taken place incredibly bravely by Palestinians in Gaza, calling on Hamas to end the war. And it is those people that we have to remember when we think about moving towards taking constructive steps that don't compromise our security, but take constructive steps to realize that we can actually have a reality in which we can live in peace with our neighbors. There are individuals who lost loved ones. I will point to one specific individual. He's became very famous after October 7th, Maoz Yinon, who lost both of his parents on October 7th. He's the founder of the Abraham hostels, which I don't know if anyone has been to an Abraham hostel in Israel. After October 7th, after he lost his parents, instead of saying, how can I ever talk to a Palestinian again, he made it essentially his life's mission to say, I will not allow my parents' death to be in vain. I will not allow for this situation to continue to feed a cycle of violence. We need to find a way where we can see humanity in one another And one of the first people that wrote to him after October 7th was Aziz Abu Sara, who's one of the founders of Mejdi Tours. He's a Palestinian from Jerusalem who lost his brother. His brother was killed in Jerusalem by IDF soldiers. His brother was throwing rocks, as he will note, as many Palestinian children do to Israeli soldiers, and his brother was shot. This individual, this Palestinian from East Jerusalem, after he saw and he heard, he had met Moshe Yonah in some prior encounter many, many years ago. After he saw that both of his parents were murdered, he immediately reached out to him. That act of empathy was so hugely important, and it takes one act. I, after October 7th, spoke to a girl named Majd Mashrawi, from Gaza, who was in Saudi Arabia at the time, and her entire family was in Gaza. And we spoke to each other after October 7th, just crying with one another. Her family, she was trying to figure out any way that she could get them out of Gaza so that they wouldn't fall victims to this war. And she knew also that I was in deep pain for the actions of people of Hamas, right? Palestinians. And we were still able to communicate with one another and understand and see the humanity in one another. It is those interactions that we have to remind ourselves. And unfortunately, most Israelis, and most American Jews for that matter, don't have the opportunity to have those engagements. I didn't, right? I told you the first time I met with a Palestinian was in college. Most Israelis, right, my husband, who grew up his whole entire life, didn't meet with Palestinians until he started dating me and met people that I was working with and my friends. It is the ability to humanize others not only as enemies and to understand that not everyone on the other side is an enemy that allows people to take steps towards being able to one day make peace.
Adina, let's, first of all, thank you. I find what you say deeply inspiring, and I'm also very skeptical about how two traumatized people who have both lost so much to one another as a result of one another's conflict, that the kind of vision that you're talking about could ever be very widespread. I mean, I certainly credit that the individuals you spoke of did what they did and felt what they felt and said what you reported, but I'm wondering whether that could be scaled on a broad scale. I will just say, and then we'll move on, the Israelis I have talked to are done with two-state solution. In fact, they don't use the word two-state solution or 23-state solution, they call it the T word. They find it so anathema, they find it so improbable, they find it, why would we ever make peace with them? Can you believe it? Would you want to live in Gaza? Would you want to live in the Gaza envelope? They would say to Americans, would you have a Seder, on the, 100 feet away from the people that did that to us? Could you ever trust them? Could you ever, right? That the kind of idealism you talk about is very powerful, and I'm wondering whether it's so rare, could it ever really be scaled? But I want to pivot from.
Can I add
Yes,
just one thing on that?
of
Because
course.
there are Israeli organizations that are doing polling at this current moment. And when they pose questions to Israelis about the possibility of supporting what I laid out, a 23-state solution, a comprehensive regional agreement that brings about a demilitarized Palestinian state, it gets over 50% support of the Israeli public. So what is missing, unfortunately, both on the Israeli and Palestinian side, is leadership that is willing to take steps and to lead their public and to take them to a place that you can only get to if there is political will. And I don't fault any Israeli or any Palestinian for saying, two-state solution, that's just, ludicrous, because they haven't seen any actions or any steps being taken by their leadership that is making it feel a reality. If anything, we are being taken backwards. But the actual base of potential support, if we were to get to a reality in which we had leaders that were leading, it's there.
Okay, fair enough. What I want to do now is pivot to exactly the issue you're talking about, Adina, which is leadership. And what I wanted to do, just to see if we're in the same parsha, if we're in the same place, if we see a snapshot of Israel, I want to offer you a snapshot of Israel. Exactly nothing that I say is original. Not one thought is a thought that I've thought of. I'm going to make 5 real quick points. 4 come from Daniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi's podcast, which is kind of my go-to on Israel. Daniel is my rabbi on Judaism, and Daniel is my rabbi on Israel. Daniel and Yossi are both. And then the 5th point comes from Micha Goodman. So I'm just kind of summing up 5 points about Israel, and I want to hear if we're in the same place on this. Okay, point 1, Israel's government is thoroughly corrupt. There is just a problem of corruption with the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That's all the last several podcasts of Daniel and Yossi say, I mean, just to make the point very clearly, Qatar, which is Hamas in suits, as Micha Goodman said from this space last week, Qatar buys off people with money. I think our country saw that this weekend. And Qatar has bought off lots of powers. Qatar bought off people who work very high up in the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu, so much so that they were the subject of investigations by the Attorney General's office and the Shin Bet. And what Prime Minister Netanyahu did, because he was being investigated, his colleagues were being investigated, was to fire the people who were investigating them. Could you believe it? And when he did, and he fired them while he was being investigated, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously before Pesach he could not do that. And it was unanimous that it included conservative jurists. In fact, it included the conservative jurist that the right had wanted to become the Chief Justice. And the entire court spoke with one voice. He could not do that. So there's this problem of corruption of the Israeli government. Second is that Israel has lost its way with this war. And I want to dwell there. Israel has lost its way with this war. Both Daniel and Yossi, for so many of the months of the war, both took the position that this was a just war that was being justly fought. And in the most recent podcast in particular, they both say that's no longer the case for so many reasons. Number one, there's absolutely no strategy. Number two, there's absolutely no vision of a day after. Number three, it's costing, put aside moral damage. Well, that's also nothing to put aside. But that's not even the basis. It's lasting reputational damage to Israel. Number four, that the reason now is expanding our territory in Gaza, and which has the result of the 5th problem, which is that the entire Israeli people is not behind it. That's another point Micha made here last week. And that there are going to be soldiers who aren't going to fight this war. And that the soldiers who will fight this war are going to be a very specific kind of type, genre of Israeli citizen, because it's now about settlement expansion in Gaza. And so Israel has lost this war. I will also say, Adina, and one of the reasons I was so grateful for this, I think the fact that this war is not like the war it was right after October 7th, I'll just speak for myself, it's left me with no voice. Because when it came to defending Israel, this is a just war that we're fighting justly, I gave 100 sermons from this pulpit making that case. I pissed a lot of people off. But I made that point over and over and over again because I believed it was a just war being fought justly, and I have vocabulary and I have language and I have categories to make that case. I don't think that's the case anymore, like Daniel and Yossi, and I don't have different vocabulary, new vocabulary to make that point. But also Israel itself, Israel citizens, are just demoralized by this ongoing war. Point 3 is fatigue and exhaustion in Israel. I'll tell you what the biggest growth cohort of Temple Emanuel is. For a long time, our biggest growth cohort was kind of retired couples in their 60s to 90s, and I love that. Our biggest growth cohort now are young Israeli families. We had at Shabbat Alive on Friday night, we have young families. We had so many young Israeli families, young parents, young kids. This is the future of Israel who are dancing at Temple Emanuel on Ward Street because they can't take it anymore, fatigue and exhaustion. The 4th point is just fissure and division. The notion that this government would ask its heroic soldiers to continue fighting their third tour of duty, their fourth tour of duty, their fifth tour of duty, and longer and longer and longer, while at the same time the government is pressing for a Haredi exemption. That dog don't hunt. That's just not tenable. And the last point that I will bring, those are all, and all of those points, not one word, not one syllable, not one letter is mine. It's just, I'm summarizing Daniel and Yossi from Jerusalem. The fifth point is from Micha, which is just the heroism of ordinary Israelis, and how ordinary Israelis, despite it all, Amrot HaKol, are leaving their lives, their beds, their partners, their children, their jobs, their cup of coffee, their workout routine, their paycheck. They're leaving everything to go fight for the third, fourth, and fifth time. The heroism of ordinary Israelis. So that is what Israel is, where Israel is, and I wanted to know, are we on the same, in the same parsha, and what would you agree with, what would you disagree with, and how might you just offer your own insights into that critique?
So I think that we're very much in the same parsha, and I have a lot of respect for Daniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi, and what I would add to it. And I would add to it in a few different ways. And one is where do I take all of that and understand, my role here in the United States? And I would add to it that I think, you were saying, where is your place with all of this feeling? And I would say your place is with J Street, because what I think a lot of Israelis and I think a lot of American Jews are feeling, right? And we were there on October 7th standing up and saying Israel has the right to defend itself after this horrific attack on innocent civilians. And we were sold, right? The same way that when I was just in Israel on a family trip with over Passover. And my friends were saying to me, we were told after this war, right? Because right before October 7th, you had people out in the streets protesting for Israeli democracy, right? And they were told, stop, right? Biyachad nenatzeach, together we will win, unite. And that's also, what we adopted here, right? In the American Jewish community. We need to stop and acknowledge and stand up and unify and say, we are threatened and we need to defend ourselves. At the same time, of course, J Street always said, as did the Biden administration, right, how you do so matters, and defending yourself in accordance with international law and, making sure that what you are doing is the appropriate response. That was always what we had said from the beginning. But many Israelis look back on how they sort of just paused and said, and were, silenced from any sort of potential critique or criticism of the Israeli government, and now look back on that and say, we were fooled by our government. We were told to sit down and be quiet and stand up and do everything and stop your lives and be there. And that is the true heroism of Israeli society, is that the resilience and the community and the responsibility and the accountability and the fact that you had Israelis that were doing the job of the government when the government was not functioning is one of the most incredible things about the Israeli society and the Israeli public. But what they were also told, essentially, is do all of that and continue to show up and show up and show up and show up and pursue this war. And we're never going to tell you that there's a day after strategy, and we're never going to tell you, we're going to tell you that it's actually to release the hostages, but when we see that the only way that's actually releasing the hostages is a ceasefire deal, and then you delay and delay and delay and delay, and the same ceasefire deal from May 2023 is the ceasefire deal that comes into effect in January 2024. These people who stood up and stopped their lives are saying we were fooled. And I look at myself here, right, and I say, okay, I look back, where we are today and the way that Netanyahu is pursuing this war is not very different from where we were 6 months ago.
Yeah, so Adina, I wanna pivot now to us American Jews here and what we do about it, but I wanted to frame this with just, to me, such a revealing statistic. Among the many, I think because we have so many concerns about what is happening in Israel now, all that we just mentioned, the response of many is silence, we don't have vocabulary for it, and then ultimately disconnection. These are just a couple of statistics that, to me, are the grain of sand through which you can see the whole universe, to bring William Blake's poem in. 7 years ago, my colleagues, Michelle and Aaron and Elias, did a temple trip on March of the Living. 7 years ago. There were 15,000 people on that trip. 15,000 people went to Auschwitz and to the other camps, Birkenau, et cetera, and then 15,000 wore Israeli flags, and they went to Israel. And it was from darkness to light, okay? They just came back last week. 8,000 went to Auschwitz and Birkenau and other camps. And of the 8,000, 400 went on to Israel. 7,600 out of 8,000 went to Auschwitz. 7,600 chose not to go on to Israel. 400 went to Israel from Auschwitz. That's just wake up and smell the coffee, Jewish people. If you care about Israel and if you love Israel, something's not working. Something is not working. If 7,600 people care enough about the Jewish story that they'll go to freaking Auschwitz and won't go to Israel, that's a problem. And that's what happened. In fact, it was such a problem. Michelle mentioned it in her sermon, and I called her. I said, Michelle, really? Is that really right? Are you sure? Are these hard facts? Aaron, are these hard facts? They're hard facts. 7 years ago, 15,000 went to Auschwitz, 15,000 went to Israel. This year, 8,000 went to Auschwitz, 400 went to Israel. And so here's my question. There's obviously something is not right. Something is not good. It's bad. It's very bad what's happening in Israel. And that badness is causing a disconnect between Israel and American Jewry. And that just can't be. We have to remedy that. So the question I want to pose you, and I think here is where we will particularly have some respectful, principled differences of opinion, some Hillel Shammai stuff. What do you think we who love Israel here can do to help Israel?
Okay, I wanted to add one other thing and it will connect to my response, is just in terms of the picture that you were painting, what was, I think, absent from that picture is understanding the forces within the Israeli government that are pushing us further and further into a reality. You mentioned seizing more and more territory in Gaza. Those same individuals are working to seize more and more territory in the West Bank and foreclose on any possibility of there being a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And
this is Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and the ultra-nationalism.
Right, and the ultra-nationalist right. And
by the way, just to add, also President Trump is managing to go to the Mideast and managing not to go to Israel. Pay attention, man. That's a problem. Thomas Friedman wrote about that. President Trump, who is regarded by so many in Israel with so much love, he's going to other places, not going to Israel. There's a problem. So keep going. We
can go there too, is wake up and smell the roses. Did anyone actually think that Trump was actually like the greatest pro-Israel president ever to be? I think that it's been clear that there's
well, we got our hands full. We got our hands full with other stuff. But and if you want to get there, we can get there.
We can get there. But going back to the question about
what do we do?
What do we do? And what is the reason that there are so few Jews, right? That Jews that care deeply to understand the history of what we went through and look at Israel and decide not to go there, it is very much because of this government. And because I will also say this government, the Netanyahu government, is going out of its way to actually empower neo-Nazis in Europe, right? Because of the perception that they are supportive of Israel. So he's creating an alliance with ultra-nationalist figures in Europe, those very same people that are excusing or rewriting, right, revisionist history of the Holocaust. These are people that ministers in this government, including Netanyahu himself, are aligning with. Also parallels to our own administration. But I think that's a hard thing to stomach for any American Jew who cares deeply, of course, about the combating anti-Semitism and also for learning about the reality of the Holocaust. Now, what can we do? And this perhaps is where we diverge. For me, the greatest pro-Israel activism is being able to stand up and speak out and criticize this government from a place of love of the state of Israel, and understanding that if I don't do that, then I am enabling essentially the people and the forces in this government to drive the country that I care so deeply about off a cliff. And when I stand and talk in Israel, when I was just in Hostage Square, just in Begin, standing next to Israelis, hostages that were released, hostage families, Israelis that have been putting their lives on the line for the country, who can say things about their government that are forbidden to be said in the American Jewish community. To me, that is wrong. And if we in the diaspora continue to sit silently while the country that we care so deeply about is being led by a minority 30% of the country, again, off a cliff towards a reality of perpetual conflict and living by the sword, if we sit silently, we are enabling that.
Okay, so now no, do not applaud. That's a violation of the rule. And I'm not shitting you. Don't do that. That's not okay. That's not okay. This is not a debate. That is not okay. Now, here's where we disagree. I have a real problem, or let me ask it as a question. In a world where so many Americans hate Israel so deeply, I really worry about adding fuel to the fire. You know, my colleague David Wolpe, he's a great, great rabbi.
His father
Right.
was the rabbi at the shul where I grew up, who I know very well.
There you go, all interconnected. Okay, David Wolpe goes to Harvard for a year after an incredibly distinguished career as a rabbi at Temple Sinai in LA. And he goes to Harvard, the Divinity School. And he goes, the Divinity School is throwing a Sukkot party. And he goes to the Sukkot party, and this is before October 7th, right? Because that was on October, that was the 8th day, that was Simchat Torah. And he finds out that what you need to gain admittance to the Sukkot party is that you are an anti-Zionist and that you do not believe there should be a state of Israel. And he says, well, I'm a pro-Israel Jew. I believe Israel has a right to exist, and I believe Israel has a right to defend itself. And they said, you're not welcome to our Sukkot affair. He goes to talk to the Divinity School head, and the Divinity School head has, and he says this far more eloquently than I ever could, but she has a big picture on her door about the Palestinians and the injustice of the Palestinians. There's no airspace for any other oppressed minority, et cetera, or for any oppressed people, just the Palestinians. And he found it unrelievedly hostile. So here's my question. In a more perfect world where there was a lot of love for Israel and people could hear it and on the merits and it was a conversation like this, okay. But in the real world, where it is now mainstream to say that Israel was a historic mistake. It is now mainstream to say that Israel should not exist. It is now mainstream to say that we are just oppressors and we stole another person's land and we don't have a narrative that entitles us to that. Why would we throw oil on the fire?
Yeah, so I've heard this, I've had this type of conversation before, and this specific argument that is brought. And I actually believe that by not presenting a nuanced picture of what it is actually to show true and deep love for Israel and care for Israel, while also being able to criticize the policies that we disagree with, that actually gives more fuel to the people who so vehemently oppose Israel, because they see a binary. I disagree with the binaries. That's part of the reason why I work for J Street, because J Street believes in the and, that you can hold two things at once, right? Two things at once can be true. And it is the problem that we are in a reality that is so polarized. The conversation in our own community and in the conversation outside of our community has become polarized. It's become a black and white issue, but it's not a black and white issue. And we need to model how it is not a black and white issue. So if we engage in spaces with a narrative that is both critical of those policies, if you can reach an area of agreement with someone who is an anti-Zionist in the sense that there might be injustices that are happening to the Palestinian people, I can agree with that with an anti-Zionist. Do I believe that that means that the Jewish people don't have a right to a homeland? No, we disagree on that. But at least they have a concept that a Zionist is not only someone that seeks to erase the self-determination of another people.
So, Adina, let me just close this piece of the conversation by saying, I think it's extremely hazardous to Israel's health for American Jews to dump on Israel in a public way. Now, I have no problem with offering our thoughtful critiques to Israelis in Israel. I have no problem with going to Jerusalem and Hartman and working with Israelis where we convey it to people who know Israel and love Israel, and we try to make it better. That's what Hartman does, tries to make it better. That's what Micha does with Mabua, try to make it better. But in this world where hatred of the Jewish state is mainstream, it feels to me like a betrayal of our, that's how it feels like.
I think we will disagree because I feel that if we continue to take that approach here, essentially we are allowing a vision and a reality for Israel to essentially, we are creating a reality in which Israel is everything that what you just sat here and outlined, right? We are allowing that to become the state.
But how are we allowing? Israel is a democracy. Can't only Israel fix Israel? Can't only Israelis fix Israel? We don't get to vote in Israeli elections, and therefore our dumping on Israel at this campus or in this news and writing an op-ed, as a Jew, I am appalled by Israel. How does that actually solve anything in Israel? What would solve things in Israel is if they vote Netanyahu out and vote a different leadership in, that would help Israel. But our writing an op-ed dumping on Israel, how does that help Israel?
But then I'll ask you a question. Is it okay for the forces in the United States who align themselves with Netanyahu to find their ways to meddle in Israeli politics? There are plenty of American Jewish organizations that are very strongly supporting the same institutions and individuals that are pursuing a judicial overhaul that is happening currently right now. So there is already engagement by the American Jewish community for decades in the reality on the ground in Israel. Why is it not okay for individuals who disagree with the ruling government in the diaspora to also exercise that same speech?
Right. So I don't have a problem with whatever your convictions are about Israel, going to Israel or even from here talking to Israelis or doing advocacy within an Israeli context where the people you're trying to advocate are Israeli voters or Israeli elected leaders. But to do it in this context where people hate on Israel, I just don't feel that's effective. I want to just bring up the one last thing to save the best for last, where we will disagree again, but I really wanted to hear your voice. The legislation that was sponsored by Bernie Sanders and it was signed by some Democratic senators, including Markey and Elizabeth Warren here, which would restrict, ban, limit American arms sales to Israel while it is in the middle of a 7-front war. I'm just so curious to hear how that is a good thing from your point of view.
So this conversation about the joint resolution of disapproval was essentially, again, back to binaries, painted just in black and white terms, right? It's either you support security assistance for Israel or you support an arms embargo, but that's false. That's not the reality of what this resolution was. Essentially, you had senators who took a vote in Congress and said, in the Senate, and said, individuals who supported the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, $3.8 billion of aid to Israel every year, who supported supplemental funding for just after October 7th for Israel, supporting Israel's defense, who are taking a vote that, by the way, was a symbolic vote because that joint resolution of disapproval was brought to the floor when these sales had, the time for actually being able to stop those sales had passed, and it wasn't going to pass anyway. But the senators that decided to take that vote because they cared deeply about the security of the state of Israel, and they felt that the way in which Netanyahu and what essentially the Biden administration was allowing to take place, right, by not using more of American leverage and pressure on Netanyahu, was actually more detrimental to Israel's security and was pushing the reality of a continuous, endless war, like we are seeing today, further and closer and closer to a reality in which Israelis would be less safe. And so the members of Congress, the senators that voted in favor of a joint resolution of disapproval, took a symbolic vote to say, we, people that care about Israel's security and the state of Israel, believe that the way that this government is pursuing the war is actually detrimental to Israel's security. And so, yes, I think when you have a relationship of friends, the same way that you have a relationship like the U.S.-Israel relationship that is so important, you're able to, one, understand the nuance of what it is to support and to say that there might be points of disagreement, but those points of disagreement don't mean that you don't care about the survival and the security of the state of Israel. It means that you have a point of disagreement about what will actually ensure the security of the state of Israel.
So, Adina, let me just close and comment, and then we'll ask Michael to get some questions. I acknowledge the war is going not well, and that the war, for all the reasons Daniel and Yossi outlined, we're in a rut, we're in a ditch, and it's just draining Israel. It's killing a lot of innocent Gazans, and it's disconnecting the Jewish people from the state of Israel. So it is not going well. And so what you say in some theoretical world is not Israel hating or Jew hating, but in the actual world that we live in, for my money, Israel has one friend in the world, and it's called the United States of America, that is always with it. And so the notion that some number of senators, 20 senators or whatever it was, voted, and you could say it's symbolic, you could say that there, you could lawyer it with all kinds of caveats and cavils and qualifications. It doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. But the way that it would be seen is that in the world at large, Israel had one friend, and now that friendship is less tight, and there's actually one out of every 5 senators is opposed to arming Israel in this way. And I just feel that's an extremely dangerous message for the world and for Israel. And I'll just close with this last story. On October 9th in Boston, 2 days after October 7th, there was this big rally in the Boston Commons, and huge people, a lot of people there. And 2 of our elected leaders spoke. Among them, 2 spoke, Senator Markey and Congressman Auchincloss. Senator Markey said, and this is 2 days later, Israel hadn't even started its war effort, right? He said, and I hope Israel will act with restraint and bring peace soon. And he was roundly booed. And Congressman Auchincloss said, wait a minute, when 9/11 happened, I don't remember Israel or anyone else telling America to act with restraint and bring peace too. Nations have a right to defend themselves and exercise their own sovereignty. And so I'm concerned about the symbolic statement this makes, that there's a lot of daylight between America, 1/5 of America's Senate and Israel, and also I just don't like the idea of another nation telling Israel how it can defend itself, even as I get complexity and life is an and machine, even though I'm hating this war like so many American Jews are and like so many Israeli Jews. Adina, I just want to thank you so much for your wisdom and your time and your comments. And Michael, if you can take this this mic and ask the questions that have been offered by our folks here tonight.
First of all, I just want to say on behalf of everybody, I think that let me say it, the courage that both of you showed in being here tonight and expressing your deeply held and honest views, both forcefully and with great articulation, I think do a credit to everybody here. So thank you very much for that. I think it was very helpful to everybody to hear that and see that we can have a real difference of opinion stated in a way that allows people to really hear both sides and express their views. I think the first question I have probably goes to you, Wes, and it's in its shortest form. It's that it goes to the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza. That it seems to be shown by a number of groups with credibility that there's a lot of humanitarian aid that's needed, a lot of humanitarian aid that is available, but a lot of humanitarian aid that is not being allowed into Gaza, with very detrimental consequences for the people who live in Gaza. So one, you may have a different view on that as to the legitimacy of that. But two, if you feel that there's is a legitimacy to that, do you have any sense of should American rabbinical and religious leaders, particularly Jewish leaders, speak up about that and weigh in on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a very good question, and I wish they had asked it of Adina. So here's what I would say about that. Gaza civilians need and deserve humanitarian aid. It's the right thing to do morally, and it's just a horrible look for Israel. I'm so concerned about the moral issue and the reputational issue to Israel. Here's the thing that I don't know the answer to, which is it does what I have read is that the aid that has come in to date is stolen by Hamas, and that in fact Gaza civilians who deserve that aid and need that aid, and they should have that aid as a moral matter, as an ethical matter, they should have that aid. They don't get the aid because of Hamas. And if you remember the horrible hostage release spectacles that we had, you would see these Gaza soldiers who have been living in their caves coming out with freshly starched outfits, and they look fit as a fiddle and very well fed. So it is true that Gaza civilians are emaciated, and that is horrible at every level. And it is true that the Hamas monsters are fit as a fiddle. And what I have heard is that they steal and take the food that was intended for humanitarian relief, and that what Israel is. And by the way, I also believe that, like UNRWA and a lot of these supposed humanitarian organizations, are enablers of Hamas and partners of Hamas. So would it be morally appropriate if Israel tried to provide that provision directly? If it would work so that it actually got to its intended recipients, maybe it would be better than the current system, which is not working. See how well fed Hamas soldiers are and how emaciated the population in Gaza is.
Can I add to that? So there have been, of course, and J Street is in touch with the coordinator of government activities in the territories that also is essentially has the mandate to facilitate the humanitarian organizations, international organizations that are bringing aid into Gaza. And right now there is no aid going into Gaza for over 68 days, for over 2 months. And while it is true that there have been cases in which Hamas has siphoned off aid, that is not false. The fact is that right now, there is a policy that by all intents and purposes is essentially collectively punishing all other Palestinian civilians who were receiving aid during the ceasefire. And when you look at the prices, right, and essentially we've created a scenario in which it is Hamas is able to benefit more from this scenario of a blockade than from when actually there was just flood of aid that was coming into the Strip and able to be accessed by the civilians that actually need that aid. And the humanitarian organizations were working to coordinate with the coordinator of government activities in the territories, with the Israelis, to ensure that there were processes and mechanisms in place so that the aid would get to the desired recipients. So again, for me, the importance is, of course, nuance. And understanding that the policies that we are enacting are, they're not only punishing Hamas and terrorists, they are effectively punishing an entire people. And it's right about 2 million people that live in the Strip. To remind people what the estimates were from Israelis about the amount of actual Hamas terrorists that they were going after was about 30,000, right? Now, if you want to expand that and multiply it in terms of people who are affiliated with Hamas, you can do that, but you still end up with a majority of a population that is essentially being collectively punished as a result. And that statistically also is essentially feeding the ability now to recruit additional. Right, we are feeding the mechanism of recruitment for more terrorists and for more hatred towards Israel and to the Israeli people. And to me, that is creating a greater security threat to Israel than actually allowing aid in to people who need it.
Adina, I have 3 questions which I'll read to you at once. I think they're designed to sort of suss out, maybe at some extreme level, just what J Street's positions are on some issues. So I'll give 3 of them to you, and it should help us all, maybe by going to the, like lawyers like to do, to go to the extreme to see what it says about J Street's position. So I'll give them to you. Question number 1 is, given J Street's opposition to the current war, what would an appropriate response to October 7th have been? 2, do you think that, given what you said earlier about the sort of the causes of October 7th, do you regard Hamas as a terrorist organization or as a group of activists or fighters who are fighting for the Palestinian cause? And 3, does J Street believe in BDS?
Okay. Does J Street? Okay.
Oh, you didn't hear it. The last question was, does J Street believe in BDS? Oh.
Do we believe in the boycott? Do we support the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement? Okay, so 1, Hamas is a terrorist organization. That is our position. 2, what was an appropriate response to October 7th? On October 7th, we said Israel has the right to defend itself, okay? We do believe, right, when there is a military threat, that you can respond militarily to that threat. It is okay to target terrorists. And we stand by that and believe that Israel has the right to defend itself when threatened. And we also believed that there needed to be, there is no sole military solution to the conflict. Together with a military approach to being able to target terrorists, right, to target those that are threatening you, you also need to be working diplomatically to realize a reality in which that same threat can be marginalized. And what would have been key is prioritizing the release of the hostages at the beginning. We saw what happened in November and how many hostages, over 100 hostages, were released in that first humanitarian pause. We needed to get them out. We needed to bring them home. We did not have to wait for a reality in which they would be held and still held. And now there are 58 hostages that are still being held, and they are still not being prioritized to be brought home. That would have been an appropriate response, would have been prioritizing the hostages over the type of war that we saw being waged. Does J Street support the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement? No. And why? Is because the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement essentially doesn't believe in the reality that we believe in, which is a reality in which you have Jewish self-determination alongside Palestinian self-determination. So no, what we did support is the Biden administration that had an executive order that brought sanctions onto violent settlers that were destabilizing the situation in the West Bank, not to mention also violating human rights of Palestinians, attacking Israeli soldiers, the very people that were sent there to defend them. So yes, we believed in the sanctions that were being advocated for in the legislation, in the executive order by President Biden, that unfortunately was revoked by Trump when he came into office.
I think that's helpful. Thank you in helping us understand where J Street stands. The difficult question that I think Wes raised with you is sort of encapsulated by this question. What words might you suggest for us to use when talking with people who are outside the Jewish community to convey to them that we, A, wholeheartedly support the existence of Israel, but that, B, we disagree with the current government in Israel? In other words, how do we get to a point where we can express our dissatisfaction with the government, but at the same time not create the situation that Wes, I think, articulated, of we weaken support for Israel among our non-Jewish friends?
Well, I think it's kind of the answer to me is in the question in and of itself. It's being able to start every conversation with an understanding that the belief in the existence of the state of Israel, that nothing that one is about to say about the critique of Israeli policies negates that person's belief in the importance of the existence of the state of Israel and the right to Jewish self-determination. If you start a conversation from that point, if you put that out, this just made me think of an Instagram reel that I saw in which someone put up on a reel. It was a very unfortunate incident that took place outside of a Ben Gvir event in New York, in which there was a mob of pro-Ben Gvir supporters that essentially encircled a girl that had been a passerby that they thought was part of a anti-Ben Gvir, pro-Palestinian demonstration, and they were attacking her while she was being walked with a police escort. And the person who was talking about it and criticizing these individuals started the reel, the Instagram reel, by saying, for any people here who want to use this to support their agenda, their anti-Israel agenda or anti-Zionist agenda, this reel is not for you, right? So to be able to start from a place in which you say, right, what I'm about to say, right, is important in understanding that it is not to be used for the belief that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. It is to be used for actual values-based criticism about a place that I do believe in. The same way that we believe as Americans and can have a conversation about America in which we criticize our government and our country, and it's not to negate the existence of the United States. Starting from that point and then entering into a conversation in which you outline what that critique is what is necessary to have to say in those spaces in which you feel that it could be used against you.
Another question is, given the unfortunate history of trying to reach peace deals with Palestinians, whoever represented them at the time the efforts were being made, and the failure of those efforts, why should we have any reason to believe or faith to believe that a deal can be struck with the Palestinian people, either because of their leadership, the people themselves, or the situation in general? What is to give us optimism that a true peace deal is in the foreseeable future in the offing?
I don't think anyone thought that we could have peace with Egypt. I don't think anyone thought we could have peace with Jordan. And we have, peace with both of those countries. You can call it a cold peace, you can call it whatever it is, but you have Egypt that is helping to broker every single ceasefire negotiation that occurs right now, and you have, Jordan that is also engaged. What I would say to those people is that is exactly the reason why you zoom out to a comprehensive regional approach, because by bringing in other players with other interests that are there to provide essentially a regional security safety net, you are expanding and engaging others and involving others that have an interest in security and have more at stake when that is threatened. That is why the comprehensive approach is so important. That is why it's important to bring in regional actors to engage not only the Middle East, but also the United States and Europe, and others that have a vested interest in stability and security in the region. It is not only about the Palestinians and Israelis, it's about zooming out and create an infrastructure that actually has the ability to maintain that security and stability.
And I think this will be the last question, given the time. How does J Street envision a hostage release deal being achieved that does not, at the same time, empower Hamas or leave Hamas in power or that threatens Israeli security in the near future from the continued activities of Hamas, who might be seen as having achieved a victory if the way to get there is some ceasefire that allows Hamas to claim victory and remain in control in Gaza.
I will say that Hamas is trying very hard to paint for themselves a picture of victory, but any Palestinian that lives in Gaza does not see victory. And you can see it when you zoom out from their grotesque ceremonies that they did during the ceasefire agreement. They try to create a facade as if they have so much support behind them. They don't. The people are suffering, and they are not standing there victoriously in those ceremonies saying, look, Hamas, you have brought us victory. Hamas has brought them nothing but destruction. And you can see that from the risks that individuals are taking in those protests that I mentioned. But what is important to note is that, and J Street said this from the beginning, Hamas should not be in operational control of Gaza. And what does that mean? It should not be governing, and it should not have security control in Gaza. Hamas has already agreed to relinquishing governing control in Gaza. That had taken place, by the way, also in the May proposed ceasefire arrangement in the phased agreement. Now, what has always been a sticking point is the security control. And what has been brought up at every single regional summit in the Arab League and every engagement is, how do you actually address that issue that Hamas would still have its arms, right? One, how do they relinquish control? Governing control. You have a Palestinian Authority who, yes, is not perfect by any means, but they are a hell of a lot better than Hamas, who are willing to step in and govern Gaza. The only people that are preventing them from being involved in any post-war reality is the Netanyahu government that doesn't want them there. Now, that's one piece of the puzzle. That's the governance piece. Also, by the way, our US tax dollars had been going to the US Security Coordinator's Office, which was training Palestinian Authority security forces. And essentially, there is a Palestinian security force that is being trained by the Americans that has the ability to also continue to build their capacity to go into Gaza. That is not enough. You need other parties, you need a regional structure that is supporting those Palestinians to actually fight Hamas. And yes, you will need to fight Hamas. There will need to be a military component to this. But that would take place together with Egyptians, who have already been willing to come to be a part of that force. But no Arab state is going to come into Gaza without there being a Palestinian component alongside that Arab force. And that is where we are stuck today. But essentially what J Street is saying is we need to create a reality in which there is the mechanism in place that has been discussed by the Arab League and is the basis of improvement for a reality in which you would have a Palestinian governance supported by a regional structure, also by the Americans and the international community, that also includes an Arab force that is also supporting a security force, that is also supporting a Palestinian security force that is essentially fighting and disarming Hamas. All of this is in coordination with Israel. This is not without coordination with Israel. That is what is being, it's not a J Street, it's a J Street supported policy position, but that is what is being discussed by any serious player on the ground in these negotiations, in the Gulf, in Israel, in the West Bank, in Egypt. Every time they meet, this is the day after plan that is the only feasible day after plan that allows for there to be any sort of semblance of stability and potential reconstruction in Gaza. And unfortunately, what is stopping it is the Netanyahu government's refusal for there to be any semblance of a Palestinian Authority presence within Gaza.
Wes, did you want to?
So first of all, Adina, I just wanted to thank you. Your love for Israel and passion for Israel are so clear. You literally give your life to working for the Jewish people and the Jewish homeland. So thank you for being here tonight. I want to close just by issuing a thought and invitation to our people here. I think the biggest danger that I see is disconnection from Israel. It's the 8,000 who went to Auschwitz and the 400 who went to Israel, the 7,600 who said, ugh, it's just too much, it's too hard, it's too sad. I want to just invite all of you to not do that. And I want to leave you with a question. What will you do to stay connected with Israel when the going gets tough? I think it's a really hard time for Israel. I think it's a really bad time for Israel. I think it's a really low energy time for Israel. I do think that the current government is draining the joy and the vitality and the hope out of the country. And we can't control that. Only Israelis can solve that problem. And in the fact of that, as that goes on, I think a lot of people do what those 7,600 people on Michelle's March of the Living Trip do, disconnect from Israel. Stop thinking about it, stop talking about it, stop going there. And what I want to say is the fact that we may disagree about what we critique, and we may disagree. I would never critique Israel publicly, and I would never urge a congressperson or a senator to vote anything but for Israel all the time. We can agree to disagree on that. But what I want to, and you guys do what you want to do, act in accordance with your own conscience. What I want to urge you to do is care about Israel and do something for Israel and stay connected to Israel. Keep thinking about Israel. Keep reading about Israel. Keep visiting Israel. Keep going to Israel. Keep loving Israel in ways that are consistent with your own conscience. It took us 2,000 years to get Israel. Israel is a miracle. We're just so lucky that we get to live when Israel exists. Don't take this miracle for granted. Use the remaining energy you have in your life to give your gift of energy and strength to the Jewish homeland, which the Jewish people needs to stay alive. Thank you.